Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging headfirst into, well, a truly seismic shift in American law and life. The U.S. Supreme Court ruling from June 27, 2025, concerning birthright citizenship.
Yeah, a big one.
And here's the crucial thing you need to know up front, and it's a really important distinction. This decision didn't directly end birthright citizenship.
Not exactly, yeah.
But don't let that fool you. This is a ruling with immediate, potentially sweeping consequences that you absolutely need to be clued into.
That's right. Our mission today is really to cut through all the noise. We're going to unpack what birthright citizenship actually is, what the Supreme Court specifically ruled in the Trump v. Casey Inc. case,
Right.
and most importantly, what this could mean for the future of the U.S. I mean, everything from individual rights to the very balance of power in our government.
So what we really want you to take away from this deep dive today are the absolute must-know facts. We'll help you grasp the surprising ripple effects of this ruling so you feel genuinely informed, getting all the nuanced details without feeling overwhelmed. Let's start at the very beginning. What exactly is birthright citizenship?
Okay, so at its core, birthright citizenship,
Yeah.
also known by its Latin term, tris soli, which literally means right of soil.
Right of soil.
It's the principle that automatically grants U.S. citizenship to individuals born on U.S. soil. And this is regardless of their parents' immigration status. It's a concept deeply woven into the fabric of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which was ratified way back in 1868.
And that amendment is pretty foundational to this, isn't it? It states, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. That language, it seems pretty clear on its face.
It does seem clear.
Mhm.
And this principle was further solidified by the U.S. Supreme Court in a landmark 1898 case, United States v. Wong Kim Ark.
A really key case.
Absolutely. In that case, the court unequivocally ruled that a child born in the U.S. to Chinese immigrant parents was indeed a U.S. citizen under the 14th Amendment. And look, this has been the consistent interpretation for over a century.
That's a pretty powerful precedent. I know people sometimes wonder, though, are there any historical exceptions to this general rule?
Historically, yes, there have been very, very narrow exceptions. Things like children born to foreign diplomats or, say, individuals born under hostile occupation.
Okay.
Going further back, certain Native American tribes were initially excluded before 1924, though that's obviously changed. It's also worth noting that the U.S. isn't alone in this practice. We're one of approximately 30 countries globally, including our neighbors Canada and Mexico, that continue to uphold birthright citizenship.
Okay, so that's the historical and legal bedrock. Now let's talk about the recent decision everyone's buzzing about. This was the case of Trump v. Casey Inc., which tackled a challenge to President Donald Trump's executive order issued on January 20, 2025. That order aimed to end automatic birthright citizenship for children born in the U.S. to parents who are undocumented or on temporary visas.
And here's where it gets really interesting, and it's a truly crucial point for you to grasp. The ruling, authored by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, did not address the constitutionality of the executive order itself.
Yeah, and for me, that's almost the most jarring part of this. It just feels like they've left the fundamental question completely dangling. So if they didn't rule on the order's legality, what did they actually focus on?
Well, the court's focus was squarely on judicial authority, specifically limiting the scope of what are called nationwide injunctions.
Okay, those injunctions that block a policy everywhere.
Exactly. They ruled that individual federal judges lack the authority to issue those universal injunctions that block federal policies across the entire country. Instead, these injunctions should generally be limited to the specific plaintiffs or perhaps the regions involved in the lawsuit.
And what was the immediate practical impact of that specific decision?
Well, this ruling partially stayed injunctions that federal judges had already issued in Maryland, Massachusetts, and Washington state.
Okay.
What this means, practically speaking, is that President Trump's executive order could potentially take effect in up to 28 states, the ones that did not challenge it in court. And this could happen after a 30-day period following the ruling. So we're talking roughly around July 27, 2025.
Right. So just to be crystal clear for everyone listening, the court explicitly avoided deciding whether Trump's executive order actually violates the 14th Amendment.
Correct.
The majority opinion stressed that their decision was about the power of the judiciary, the role of the courts, not the merits of the executive order itself. Did they leave any other legal doors open for those challenging the order?
They did, actually. The court left open the possibility for plaintiffs to seek class action lawsuits.
Ah,
That's when a large group of individuals with similar claims sort of band together to sue, aiming for a ruling that applies to everyone in that defined group. It falls under Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 23b2.
Right.
This could allow them to obtain broader relief, maybe statewide or even nationwide, but this is a big but. Such lawsuits have to meet very strict certification standards. It's not easy.
Understood. And how did the dissenting justices react to this? We're talking about Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson, known for their more liberal views.
Oh, their dissents were incredibly forceful, really strong language. They argued that the ruling fundamentally undermines the judiciary's ability to enforce constitutional rights.
Wow.
Justice Sotomayor, she called it a travesty for the rule of law. And Justice Jackson warned of an existential threat to the rule of law, suggesting it could open the door to unchecked executive power.
Strong words.
Very strong. They also explicitly pointed plaintiffs towards pursuing those class action lawsuits as, the necessary next step.
Okay. So to kind of summarize the current status then, the ruling doesn't immediately implement Trump's executive order nationwide, but it creates a pathway for it to potentially move forward in states not already covered by existing injunctions.
Exactly.
Lower courts now have to reconsider their previous injunctions, and plaintiffs are actively pursuing that class action status. It really sounds like a significant shift in judicial power itself.
It absolutely is. A major shift.
So with all that legal groundwork laid, what does this actually mean for you and for the future of the U.S.? The first and perhaps most immediate thing is this distinct possibility of a patchwork citizenship system.
Yeah, that's a huge concern. We are highly likely to see this fragmented system emerge in the short term. Like we said, the order potentially taking effect in some states as early as July 27, 2025, unless new challenges prevent it. Yes. Without those nationwide injunctions, President Trump's executive order could take effect in up to 28 states, while staying blocked in others. Imagine this scenario. A child born in a state like Texas, which hasn't challenged the order, might not receive citizenship.
Right.
While a child born just across the border in, say, Maryland, where the order is blocked, would. This creates immense confusion and, frankly, an inconsistent application of what many see as a fundamental right.
And what are the practical, real-world consequences for families trying to navigate this? It's easy to picture the confusion, but what's the kind of trickle-down effect for everyday life? Things maybe people aren't thinking about beyond just a passport. Maybe, access to credit later on, or even voting rights down the line. Citizenship underpins so much.
That's precisely the concern. You're hitting on key points. Children denied citizenship in some states could be unable to get Social Security numbers, passports, or access essential government benefits like healthcare or educational support.
Huge implications.
Huge. Imagine the sheer disparity and administrative chaos if families move between states. Then there are significant deportation risks for these U.S.-born non-citizen children, potentially leading to heartbreaking family separations. Even Justice Kavanaugh, who was part of the majority, he raised concerns about the administrative burden this would create for hospitals and state agencies, just trying to figure out citizenship status for newborns. It's a logistical nightmare.
Wow. Okay, so beyond this potential patchwork system, another major impact is the potential for an increased undocumented and even stateless population.
Yes. If this executive order is enforced, even partially, we could see an estimated 150,000 newborns annually denied citizenship, particularly those born to undocumented parents or parents on temporary visas.
150,000 a year.
A year. And the Migration Policy Institute, they project that ending birthright citizenship for children of undocumented parents could increase the unauthorized immigrant population by a staggering 4.7 million by 2050.
4.7 million.
And crucially, some children could potentially become stateless, meaning they have no recognized nationality in any country. This is a very high likelihood if the order gets implemented, though, again, ongoing lawsuits might delay or prevent full enforcement.
That sounds like it would have a truly massive social and economic impact on an entire generation.
It absolutely would. Affected children could face significant barriers to education, healthcare, employment, essentially creating a kind of second-class population with limited rights and opportunities.
Which could just perpetuate cycles of poverty.
Exactly. Cycles of poverty and exclusion for generations, as many legal experts have noted. And potentially strain social services, or even lead to a workforce that contributes less to the economy because they lack legal status.
Okay, this brings us to our next point, which seems inevitable: ongoing legal challenges. The Supreme Court's ruling left the constitutionality of the executive order unresolved. That pretty much guarantees more litigation, right?
Oh, absolutely.
We know immigrant rights groups like the ACLU and LULAC are already pursuing those class action lawsuits we mentioned.
Correct. Those lawsuits are now the primary avenue for trying to get broader injunctions, or eventually, maybe, a definitive Supreme Court ruling on the order's actual legality. It's important to remember that lower courts have consistently ruled against this executive order in the past.
Right, they cited the 14th Amendment and Wong Kim Ark.
Exactly. They pointed to the 14th Amendment and that Wong Kim Ark precedent. These cases are still technically pending in federal appeals courts in the First, Fourth, and Ninth Circuits, which cover different parts of the country.
So more court battles.
Many more. A future Supreme Court ruling on the constitutionality itself seems very likely, but the outcome, especially given the current 6-3 conservative majority on the court, remains, well, uncertain.
And Justice Kagan even expressed concern, didn't she, that without nationwide injunctions, this policy could harm untold numbers of people in the meantime. That's a powerful warning.
She did, and it really highlights the human cost of these legal delays. Real people affected while the courts work things out.
Okay, so beyond the specifics of birthright citizenship, this ruling also has pretty significant implications for maybe the erosion of judicial authority overall. How does this decision weaken the judiciary's power, and why should the average person care about that?
Well, by limiting the judiciary's ability to issue these nationwide injunctions, the ruling directly weakens one of the main checks on executive power. This could allow future executive orders, not just this one, to take effect in parts of the country without immediate judicial oversight. Think about it. This doesn't just impact citizenship. It could affect a whole range of other federal policies, from environmental regulations to healthcare mandates, if they get challenged in court.
So this precedent could ripple out.
Exactly. This precedent could impact a wide range of federal policies in the coming years.
So this isn't just about empowering this particular president, is it? Could it inadvertently lead to a kind of race to the bottom where states might feel compelled to implement policies if their neighbors do, just to avoid being an outlier?
That's a very real concern and a complex one. And it's precisely why Justices Sotomayor and Jackson used that strong language, warning of executive lawlessness and an existential threat to the rule of law.
Right.
They believe this decision could embolden presidents to bypass constitutional constraints, essentially creating executive actions that are valid in some states, but not others, which, as you can imagine, leads to widespread confusion and a really uneven application of federal law.
Which sounds like a recipe for increased political and social polarization.
It absolutely is, and we're already seeing it play out. This ruling and the executive order itself has sparked significant controversy across the political spectrum. There was an AP-NORC poll back in January 2025. It showed that 51% of Americans oppose ending birthright citizenship, while only 28% support it. So there's not broad public support for ending it. This kind of ruling deeply entrenches political divides and fuels public protests, like we've already seen outside the Supreme Court.
So polarization is already evident.
Very evident. And it's likely to intensify if this policy is partially implemented.
And how has the public reaction played out so far beyond the polls and protests?
Well, President Trump has publicly praised the ruling, calling it a monumental victory, and criticizing what he termed radical left judges. This kind of rhetoric tends to galvanize his supporters while further alienating opponents. It just ramps up the social tension.
Yeah, it frames legal decisions as purely political wins or losses.
Which undermines the idea of impartial justice.
Okay, finally, what does this mean for broader immigration policy shifts? How does this fit in?
Well, the executive order itself aligns perfectly with President Trump's broader immigration agenda, which has consistently included things like increased deportations and restrictions on legal immigration.
Right.
Partial enforcement of this order might, in theory, deter some migration, but many experts also suggest it could paradoxically increase the undocumented population over time, as individuals would be born here, but without legal status.
So an unintended consequence, potentially.
Potentially, yes. Partial implementation is possible, but its long-term success really depends entirely on surviving these ongoing legal challenges and maybe potential congressional action, though that seems unlikely.
And there are international implications, too, aren't there? The U.S. has often been seen, or at least presented itself, as a beacon of opportunity.
Indeed. A move by the U.S. to limit birthright citizenship could certainly harm its international reputation as that beacon of opportunity, or as a place that embraces certain democratic ideals. It might also affect diplomatic relations with countries like Mexico or Canada, which, as we mentioned earlier, maintain just Z themselves. They might see this quite negatively.
Okay, let's bring this all together now and look at the essential points to remember as we wrap up. First, a critical consideration that most legal scholars consistently point to: ending birthright citizenship as currently defined by the 14th Amendment. Well, it generally requires a constitutional amendment.
And that's an incredibly high bar, a really high hurdle. It demands a two-thirds vote in both chambers of Congress and ratification by three-fourths of the states. Given the current political climate and, frankly, the 14th Amendment's explicit language, this is seen as a highly unlikely scenario.
Very difficult. And while the executive order's enforcement might prove temporary if courts eventually strike it down, even temporary enforcement could affect thousands and thousands of newborns, creating immediate and profound social and legal challenges. It's hard to overstate that human impact in the interim.
Yes, the human impact in the interim is significant, absolutely. And while class action lawsuits could eventually restore broader protections, that whole process is notoriously time-consuming, and the outcome is uncertain.
Right. It's also worth remembering the historical context here. Efforts to end birthright citizenship have largely been considered a fringe legal theory among mainstream legal scholars.
That's true, mainly because of the clear precedent set by Wong Kim Ark and, 125 years of consistent application.
So it's not like this is a brand new debate, but the approach is different.
Exactly. And critics argue that attempts to end birthright citizenship fundamentally undermine a core constitutional right established post-Civil War, a right specifically intended to ensure equality for all born in the U.S.
Okay, so here are the key takeaways from our deep dive today. The Supreme Court's June 27, 2025 ruling does not end birthright citizenship. Let's be clear on that.
Right.
Instead, it limits nationwide injunctions. This allows President Trump's executive order to potentially take effect in up to 28 states by approximately July 27, 2025. This could lead to a fragmented patchwork citizenship system, a significant increase in the undocumented population, and immediate legal, social, and political consequences across the country.
And looking ahead, ongoing class action lawsuits and a likely future Supreme Court review will ultimately determine the policy's long-term fate. But the immediate future may involve considerable confusion and inequality for U.S.-born children in affected states. And crucially, the ruling also sets a precedent that could weaken judicial oversight of executive actions, with much broader implications for U.S. governance and the balance of power.
And so here's a provocative thought for you to consider as we close. This ruling is about more than just citizenship. It really delves into the very structure of our government. What does this decision signal about the balance of power between our different branches, the courts, the president, Congress? And how might that shape not only immigration policy, but a host of other federal issues for years to come, long after this particular executive order is resolved?